Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. A special prosecutor tapped for the so-called doomsday cult couple case. Why the appointment only applies to Chad Daybell and not Lori Vallow Daybell's prosecution for now. The Boulder supermarket mass shooting, 10 victims identified, including a police officer. The suspect charged with 10 counts of murder.
We will hold the evildoer responsible to the full extent of the law.
Actor Armie Hammer accused of raping a woman and slamming her head against a wall. The accuser speaking out about what she says was a 4-hour-long attack.
I feel immense guilt for not speaking out sooner.
Plus, the jury now seated in the trial of Derek Chauvin. Our expert analysis as the first officer charged with murdering George Floyd goes to trial.
We're being a little bit naive when we ask people to put
of the former officer accused of murdering George Floyd have been selected. Law & Crime's Kim Johnson is in Minneapolis and is here to tell us why one of those jurors could still be cut.
Brian, a jury is fully seated in Derek Chauvin's trial. Attorneys and the judge agreed on a final juror, a white man in his 20s who works as an accountant. He said that he supports police, but didn't think 4 officers needed to respond to a counterfeit bill call, and also said Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck for 5 to 10 minutes seemed unnecessary. Here he is, defense attorney Eric Nelson, questioning him about that.
And ultimately, you also remembered that the initial autopsy said George Floyd did not die from suffocation, but a different autopsy came to a different conclusion. The question being is, you may or may not hear evidence about different medical opinions. Based on your role as a juror, can you set aside everything that you may have heard beforehand and focus exclusively on the evidence as it's presented in court?
Yes.
Of the 15 jurors seated in Derek Chauvin's trial, 6 are people of color, 9 are white, 9 of the jurors are women, and 6 are men. Now 12 jurors and 2 alternates will be sworn in on Monday. Judge Peter Cahill said the whole point of a 15th alternate juror is in case any of the 14 have to be dismissed or excused before that. Now Judge Cahill also said that he plans to release the entire jury pool after the 14 are sworn in. Opening statements begin Monday at 9 a.m. Brian.
Thanks, Kim. And as jury selection comes to a close, we asked psychologist and law and crime expert Dr. John Delatorre if we can really expect jurors to be fair and impartial once testimony in Chauvin's trial begins.
I think we're being a little naive. I think that for the most part, people can put sort of the weight of the information to the side, but they can't put the information to the side. Because as soon as they start hearing evidence, as soon as they start hearing the cases being presented, it's automatically going to trigger all of the memories, all of the information that they had already had in their brain. And you have to already be in a mindset to know that what you've been exposed to is such a limited amount of information. I think that will be key in sort of both thematically, both cases that are going to be presented, which are there's so much more that you need to know. You only got a small bit, and only those people who are open-minded to hear and can look and self-reflect and know that I only know a little bit. I need to know more in order to make a decision. That's the kind of people you want.
Joining us today is civil rights attorney and managing partner at the Cochran firm, Brian Dunn and Terry Austin. Brian, the jury is set, but one will be cut before the trial starts. What do you think of the jury so far and only having 2 alternates?
Well, one of the things that we have to understand, Brian, is that this has never happened before. The video that we've seen is completely unprecedented. The racial dynamics that are brought up are unique, but this has never happened before. And when you start looking at the makeup of the jury, you start to consider the fact that there are millions and millions of people watching everything that's happening in that tiny courtroom. This makeup seems to go over the top in terms of reflecting the diversity of the county and the nation. They seem to be understanding that this is a very public situation in a private area. And when you're talking about the 15th juror, what the people need to understand is that those 2 alternates are not going to do anything unless something happens to one of the original 12. The problem is, if you run out of more than 2 of them, you're going to be left without a juror. I strongly disagree with the idea of letting that 15th juror go, Brian.
I would as well. Terry, the demographics, as Brian touched on, of the jury is way more diverse than the county, city, and state the trial is in right now, right?
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. There's no question about it. I mean, we know that we have to give Chauvin a fair and impartial jury under the Sixth Amendment. But right now, we know that the jury is 60% white, 26% black, and 13% multiracial. That's compared to Hennepin County, which is 74% white, 14 black, and 3% multiracial. Now, the numbers are different, but I don't think those numbers are really the issue. I think the issue is, what did you think about that video and whether or not you could be fair and impartial? So I think that's the crucial issue here, Brian.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's not the color of the skin of the jurors who's making the decision. It's the evidence being presented and their mindset there. Be sure to tune in to the Law and Crime Network for gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Derek Chauvin trial in the murder of George Floyd. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, a special homicide attorney is added to one of the consensual next. Welcome back. More allegations of sexual abuse are being made against actor Armie Hammer, and now the LAPD is investigating. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with one woman's story and the high-powered lawyer representing her.
Brian, this latest accuser says that Armie Hammer essentially tortured her and that she feared he might kill her. But the lawyer for Armie Hammer says the woman's allegations of abuse simply are not true.
I met Armie Hammer on Facebook in 2016 when I was 20 years old. I fell in love with him instantly.
But the woman only identified as Effie says the relationship took a dark turn. Effie has a photo of herself with Hammer. She says he became emotionally, sexually, and physically abusive, raping her at one point for 4 hours.
He beat my feet with a crop, so they would hurt with every step I took for the next week. During those 4 hours, I tried to get away, but he wouldn't let me.
We all should avoid victim shaming and victim blaming.
Famed women's rights attorney Gloria Allred represents Effie.
It is important to emphasize that even if a sexual partner agrees to certain sexual activity, she still has a right at any point to withdraw her consent.
Whether the activity was consensual is the key question. Hammer's attorney, Andrew Bretler, shared this Instagram screen grab with Law and Crime, in which he says Effie stated, "I'm not saying he raped me." And in January of this year, she typed, "I didn't say anywhere it was not consensual."
Now, Bretler goes on to say that all of Hammer's sexual encounters have been consensual, and he actually provided us with a text message that he says Effie sent to Armie Hammer, in which she appeared to be the aggressor and Hammer actually rejected her advances. The LAPD would only confirm that Armie Hammer is the named suspect in an alleged sexual assault allegation that was filed with the police department back in early February. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Here to discuss the allegations against actor Armie Hammer is civil rights attorney Brian Dunn and Terry Austin. Terry, statute of limitations or the age of the case, not likely a problem here for the prosecution, but what about that text from Hammer's lawyer?
Those texts look really damaging to me because that's the crux of the case. Was this consensual or not? She's claiming that while some of her encounters were consensual, there were several that were not. If in fact these text messages are talking about those instances and saying that they were consensual, then that is really going to hurt her case and it's going to support his case. And technology will be a part of this, and all that evidence is going to come in. So I think that it boils down to he said, she said, and what the evidence is going to support.
Brian, Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, these cases have redefined sexual assault prosecution. With what you know so far, could Armie Hammer be next on that list?
The reason why I wouldn't put him in that category, Brian, is he hasn't achieved in life as much as those people have achieved. He hasn't achieved the level of notoriety that would cause him to fall as precipitously as a Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein. But nevertheless, the idea that we have a situation where there is a very serious allegation of very serious misconduct, torture, rape. We have to look at it broader than just these two players and think about how it is that we can expand our consciousness towards the idea of date rape and the things that people do in the privacy of their own home, having very long-term consequences.
Exactly. Now, Angela, what's the fallout been for Armie Hammer so far?
Yeah, the fallout's been pretty significant. So far, his publicist has dropped him. He's also lost out on several projects, some film projects. And it's not just from this specific allegation from Effie. She's saying this occurred back in 2017. This all started back when some women started posting on social media about Hammer's alleged sexual fetishes.
It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. As you all have pointed out, I think there's more investigation that's needed here to find out what the truth is. As I said earlier, the LAPD is investigating. We will keep tabs on whether or not a criminal case starts up. I know a civil one hasn't started yet, but you better believe that one will be close to that of the criminal case. Thank you, everyone. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, a judge adds a special homicide prosecutor to Chad Daybell's case. Is she merely there to help, or is this a sign of things to come? Plus, a supermarket in Boulder, Colorado is struck by tragedy in a mass shooting, killing 10 people. A suspect in... We're back. A suspect in a deadly mass shooting at a Colorado grocery store is now charged with 10 counts of murder. Shots rang out Monday afternoon at the King's Super grocery store in Boulder. By the end of the rampage, 10 people were killed.
Officers arrived on the scene within minutes and immediately entered the store and engaged the suspect. There was this exchange of gunfire, which suspect was shot.
The suspect, identified as 21-year-old Ahmad Al-Issa, taken to the hospital with a wound to his leg. He's expected to be processed into the Boulder County Jail. The district attorney says the motive for the shooting is still unknown, but local, state, and federal law enforcement are investigating.
In terms of statements that he may have made to investigators, first, I want to stress that he's innocent unless and until proven guilty, of course, as we do in every case. But more importantly, we're collecting those statements now and we'll be providing those in the weeks ahead.
10 victims range in age from 20 to 65. Officer Eric Talley identified as one of the fallen. Police say Talley was the first officer to arrive at the grocery store and call his actions heroic.
This officer had 7 children, ages 5 to 18. I just had that officer's whole family in my office 2 weeks ago to give him an award.
Officer Talley's patrol vehicle parked outside the police station in memory of his sacrifice. Back with us is civil rights attorney Brian Dunn and co-host Terry Austin. Colorado has unfortunately seen mass shootings and their prosecution in the past. James Holmes got 12 life sentences without parole, plus over 3,000 years in jail for the murder of 12 and injuring 70 others in a movie screening of The Dark Knight in 2012. With that being said, Brian, what's your reaction to this shooting, and what do you expect of the prosecution in this case?
Well, one of the important things that you were bringing up earlier, Brian, is the concept of the death penalty, because that's the kind of thing that a crime like this is going to resonate with. People are going to want to know, is this man going to get the death penalty? Colorado has abolished that. This is going to be a swift administration of very severe justice, and he is never going to get out of prison. But the deeper issue, Brian, is why does this keep happening?
Exactly, Terry. As Brian said, Colorado abolished the death penalty March 23rd of 2020, becoming the 22nd state to do so. So knowing that, what do you foresee in this kind of case?
Well, I think that, like Brian said, this is a very difficult case. And why does it keep happening? Look, I think my heart clearly goes out to those innocent families. And, whether the individual convicted is in jail for the rest of his life or faces the death penalty, I think the real issue here is, one, are we helping those individuals who need psychological help? And two, what are we doing as far as gun control is concerned? There's so much more that we need to do to help keep weapons of mass destruction out of the hands of individuals, and two, to just make sure that people who are getting background checks, who show signs of issues, do not receive guns. So there's so much more that we can do here, Brian.
Obviously, a number of issues in the backdrop when it comes to how this individual got a gun, how they were able to create such damage. And of course, as we said, in Colorado, this has happened more than once. You can even go back to 1999 with the Columbine shooting in the high school there in Colorado. That's well within my lifetime, as many people who are viewing this are, again, our thoughts and prayers goes out to those injured and their families, and we'll keep eyes on this case as the prosecution continues. When we come back, The addition of a Missouri prosecutor who's handled over 100 homicide cases to one of the suspects charged in the Doomsday Cult couple case. What it could mean for Chad Daybell next. Welcome back. The prosecution team for the so-called Doomsday Cult couple is growing. Law&Crime's Terry Austin is here to tell us about the unusual twist in the Chad Daybell and Lori Daybell case.
Brian, a special prosecutor has been appointed in Chad Daybell's case, but not yet in his wife Lori Vallow Daybell's case. The reason for the split isn't entirely clear.
This is a very complicated case.
Complicated is how prosecutor Rob Wood described the case of a so-called Doomsday Cult couple. Lori Vallow and her husband Chad Daybell are facing charges for an alleged plot to conceal and destroy evidence while Vallow's children were reported missing. Authorities discovered the bodies of JJ and Tylee Ryan buried in shallow graves on Daybell's property.
The amount of discovery, as we've talked about, is it's very, very large. There's a lot of information.
Homicide charges have not been filed in the deaths of Vallow's children, but Wood is asking for assistance from Missouri attorney Rachel Smith. Smith is a 25-year veteran homicide and death penalty prosecutor and worked at the Missouri Attorney General's office.
We're seeking to have her help on this case through the Madison County Prosecutor's Office, appointed as special prosecutor.
Wood says appointing Smith to the Daybell case allows him to focus on other pending cases in his jurisdiction. Chad Daybell's defense did not object to her appointment, but wanted to make sure the proper courts are consulted.
He does not get to enlarge, retain someone and say, you're going to handle all of my cases, and you're going to train my staff, and you're going to teach us how to properly prosecute cases. That's not something that he's prevented from doing. But in this particular case, he's prevented from having Ms. Smith participate unless Fremont County gives them their blessing.
The Daybells are charged in Fremont County, where Chad's property is located. Wood is the prosecuting attorney in Madison County and was appointed as special prosecutor of the Daybells case in Fremont. Wood says Madison County will be covering the cost of Smith's involvement.
I maintain a law practice primarily involving special prosecutions. I am a special prosecutor or an appointed prosecutor assisting at least 2 counties in the state of Missouri. I also consult both on legal matters and on legal training for multiple other jurisdictions.
Noticeably silent during the hearing was Mark Means, Lori Vallow Daybell's attorney. According to East Idaho News, that's because of a sealed court order suspending all upcoming hearings for Lori Vallow Daybell. The hearing started out with nearly 30 minutes in a breakout session. Then the judge announced the hearing would only be Chad Daybell and the court would reserve ruling on the issue for Lori Vallow Daybell.
Ms. Smith can be admitted, but in order to be on the case would need to either be a deputy of your office or part of your office.
In the end, Judge Boyce approved Smith's admission. The next hearing on the Daybell case is scheduled for April 7th. Brian?
Thanks, Terry. Brian, what do you make of the prosecution's request for Rachel Smith specifically? They went halfway across the country to find a homicide prosecutor. It's like saying, hey, LeBron James is going to play on my team, but he's just going to stand here.
Right.
What do you think?
It means your hunch is correct, Brian. They're going for the big charges here. They have actually gone to the trouble of getting a prosecutor that's out of their jurisdiction. And they're doing this because one of the elephants in the room, Brian, is that careers of prosecutors rise and fall on these high-profile cases. They can't afford to take any chances at all. And the idea that you have a very strong woman going after the woman in this case, there is some imagery there because people don't usually associate women with homicides. In this case, it's going to be different.
Exactly. I think it's going to be a very big case. And like you said, I don't know if this county has had such a big case. They definitely want to make sure they have the big guns to match the severity and the seriousness of this case. Terry,
Absolutely.
What about Lori Vallow's case? Do you think Rachel Smith will be added to that case as well?
I eventually she will be. Technically, Judge Boyce did not want to go out of his range. His jurisdiction is over his courtroom in Fremont County in connection with Chad Daybell. But I do think that because the judge admitted Rachel Smith pro hoc vici to help Prosecutor Wood, as long as he deputizes Smith, and I think once that happens, once she gets involved in the case, once she begins to help out, and frankly, I think she's going to help with strategy here. So I do think that ultimately she might actually be helping out in both cases, but we'll see what happens. In fact, she may say that, you know, one should go against the other. We don't know, but I think it'll be interesting to see at the end of the day what she does and how she helps Wood in terms of the prosecution of this particular case.
Yeah, and pro hoc vice is just a fancy word that we lawyers use when someone comes from a different county in. I may go and practice a case with Brian Dunn, for example, where he is. It's very common amongst defense attorneys, not so much with prosecutors. We've seen it in the George Floyd case. Looks like we're going to see it here in the Lori Vallow case. Brian, Terry, thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.